Hello and welcome to Let's Keep Moving with the APDA. My name is Tim Nordahl and I'm a physical therapist at the Boston University Center for Neurorehab. If you have a chance, we'd love to hear from you, so please log in and tell us your name and where you're joining us from today. So we'll just pull on the slides for today, and we're going to be talking about increasing physical activity in your everyday world. Practical tips for people with Parkinson's disease. As I had mentioned, I'm a physical therapist at the Center for Neurorehab. Now, we're a team of physical therapists and researchers who are working to optimize rehabilitation for people with Parkinson's disease. A quick important reminder for today is that this presentation is meant to be just general advice or general information, excuse me, and shouldn't be considered individualized medical advice. Please consult your medical team to ensure you receive the best possible care. So what I'm hoping to cover today is first just defining what physical activity is and talking about the research findings on the benefits of physical activity for people with Parkinson's. I want to get into what we consider different categories of physical activity and talk about ways of incorporating more physical activity into your everyday life. We definitely hope this can be a conversation. So as we're going along, I would love to hear from you too, to hear what strategies have been helpful for you. So first, I'd like to talk about what we mean when we use the term physical activity. And one commonly used definition is from the World Health Organization, who define physical activity as any movement produced by your muscles that requires energy expenditure. In general, the World Health Organization has noted that physical activity has benefits in decreased cardiovascular disease, hypertension, some types of cancer, diabetes, overall mental health, cognitive function, and sleep for all adults, so not necessarily just people with Parkinson's. We're going to get into some more specific benefits, but for right now, I wanted to mention that this, you can imagine this definition is so broad that we should actually discuss some specific examples of categories of physical activity. So you can imagine how this broad definition really includes many aspects of our daily lives. Physical activity, as we're thinking of it, can include leisure activities like hiking or bowling. It can include household chores or upkeep. It can include caregiving activities for those taking care of children or grandchildren. But it can also include recreational activities like gardening or sports like swimming. And also any movements that are required for your job duties if you have a more physical job. As you might imagine, physical activity with this definition also includes exercise. When we talk about exercise, we're really talking about a subcategory of physical activity that is more planned, structured, repetitive, and purposeful. And when we say purposeful, we mean that in the sense that the improvement or maintenance of one or more components of physical fitness is the dedicated goal or objective of the physical activity. So another way of thinking of this is that all exercise is physical activity, but not all physical activity is exercise. Now, one reason I wanted to go over all these different categories or ways of getting physical activity is to help you reflect on how you get your physical activity in your typical week, and to think if there are any categories that could be missing from your routine. So with that being said, we'd really love to hear from you. How do you get your physical activity? Is there anything that you think you might be missing in your weekly routine, or anything that you were thinking about trying and just haven't got started yet? So now that we've talked about what physical activity is and what we mean when we use that term, I wanted to talk about some of the research behind why this is important for people with Parkinson's disease. So very globally, researchers have shown that there is an overall improvement in your symptom management when you're engaging in regular physical activity. Regarding motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease, exercise can improve your gait, your balance, tremor, flexibility, grip strength, and motor coordination. Studies have even shown it may have an effect on non-motor symptoms such as depression, constipation, and certain cognitive symptoms. Studies also show that engaging in regular physical activity is associated with slower changes to quality of life in individuals with Parkinson's disease. And something we've discussed previously in this series, and we'll cover in a little more depth in just a moment, is that physical activity is also associated with a slower progression in the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So this is one particular study that came out fairly recently. It was published by Tsukida and colleagues and published in the journal Neurology in 2022. This study was part of a larger trial that was following patients with early Parkinson's disease. The participants gave these recently diagnosed people with Parkinson's the same questionnaires about their physical activity across 6 years of observation. As you can see in this chart, the participants who reported more physical activity had slower progression in their Parkinson's motor symptoms, which was represented by the blue line, or the red line rather, than the patients who reported less activity. They also compared the participants with Parkinson's disease to a similar group of participants without Parkinson's disease, and found that while on average, the people with Parkinson's tended to reduce their physical activity over 6 years, that control group without Parkinson's had stayed pretty steady in their activity level over this observation period. So this may be one target that we can have people really focus on behaviorally. And one of the most interesting findings from the trial was actually that it didn't really seem to matter at first how active people were. The groups were quite similar at the beginning of the trial. What tended to matter most was actually their ability to maintain their physical activity over time. So that's what tended to have more pull over the progression in their Parkinson's symptoms. One other part of this study that was also of interest regarding these categories of exercise that we've talked about today was that different types of physical activity seem to have different benefits for different symptoms of Parkinson's. So, for example, when participants reported engaging more in moderate to vigorous physical activity, which typically, if you dig into this questionnaire, typically includes more structured exercise. These participants in particular seem to develop posture, balance, and gait symptoms more slowly than those reporting less of this moderate to vigorous physical activity. They found that the maintenance of household-related physical activity seemed to relate most closely to the maintenance of function for activities of daily living over time, which is an example of how different types of physical activity may have different benefits for you that are somewhat specific to the type of activity you're practicing habitually over time. So this study is an important example of how we know from the literature that physical activity is very beneficial for people with Parkinson's. But now that we've discussed that, let's go over some general ways to incorporate more physical activity into your weekly routine. So a couple of ideas, depending on where you're starting. If you're not particularly active right now, it's important to start gradually so that you can get used to these changes to your routine. Remember that every little bit really does count. So this could start off by adding 5 minutes of stretching or walking around the house in your kitchen while you're getting ready in the morning. It could be, if you're safe on the stairs, using the stairs more frequently if you have just a flight or two instead of taking the elevator, or parking farther back in the parking lot if that's safe for you. It could, as your fitness improves, look like taking a daily walk around your neighborhood. Even just getting outside of the house once or twice a day, more than you're already doing, is a way of kind of adding this up. Remember, these little changes add up over time. One thing we talk about a lot in our clinic is thinking about what you already enjoy. So one thing that is really going to help you keep track with adding activity over time is to pick something that you find more fun or motivating. This can be a really important way to stick to things, because the best exercise program is the one that you're going to know you can stick to over time. And one other point we always like to make here is that if you happen to struggle for any reason getting regular physical activity into your week, whether that's safety, motivation, if you have any aches or pains that are limiting to you, or even just not knowing for sure where to start, please consider consulting with a physical therapist. We are always here to help you with custom-built recommendations that are made just for you. So I wanted to include this graphic because this slide is a way of comparing 2 different days to get you an idea of how physical activity could be incorporated into your daily routine. So on this page, we have 2 different examples of someone's day. Going across the top, if this was your sample day, you would begin with some stretching, walking, being active while you're cooking dinner, and taking even a dance class in the evening. Over the course of that full day, you can think of how much of that time was active versus sedentary by taking a look at the pie chart on the right of the day with those green and gray sections. So the green is meant to represent the amount of active time, gray meant to represent their sedentary time. Now compare that sample day to the day in the bottom section. This person does get a dedicated yoga class done during the middle of their day. However, over the course of the full day, you can see the rest of their day is mainly engaged in sedentary activities. And at the end of that sample day, you can see a pretty noticeable difference in the amount of overall time spent in activity versus being sedentary, again, by taking a look at that pie chart. So again, thinking of these different categories of physical activity is meant to help you think about both across an entire day at a time and across an entire week at a time, what types of activity you're getting into your routine, and also thinking about what proportion of your day is spent sedentary versus active. Okay, with that being said, I always like to remind people about the free resource that the APDA has available for download on their website. So this chart is taken from the Be Active and Beyond booklet. And as you can see here, we have different recommendations for weekly performance of cardiovascular, strengthening, flexibility, and balance exercise. So these are research-based recommendations for you based on different categories of exercise. And this is a really helpful guide for you if you're just starting a routine so that you can know how much of each type of exercise to incorporate into your weekly routine. Finally, it's also important to remind everyone that we also have the APDA exercise helpline. So if you have any questions that we don't get to today, please consider calling or emailing this free resource to receive information from our center related to any questions that you might have. All right, and thank you again for sending in your questions as we've gone through this talk. Please keep them coming, so feel free to keep sending them in. I'd like to introduce our special guest moderator for today, Tami DeAngelis from DeAngelis Physical Therapy and Wellness. So Tami was instrumental in getting this series started way back in 2020, and we're so lucky to have you back on today, keeping an eye on the questions as they've been coming in. So thanks so much for joining us, Tami.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun to be back. Yeah, we've got some good questions. If you're ready for them.
Great. Yeah, let's hear them.
Okay. We had a really good one about is it still beneficial if it's slow walking? So if you're trying to keep up your activity with walking, and if you can't walk sort of fast, or it's not as challenging as maybe it once was due to Parkinson's, is it still beneficial even if it's slow?
Yeah, and this is something I meant to get to when we talked about how every little bit counts. Some activity is always going to be better than nothing. So I definitely want to give you that encouragement that if you can still get out there and get walking, you'll help to maintain your endurance, your balance. It's just important to keep up with that as you go. Many people have trouble with this walking speed, especially over time. It's just one of those ways that Parkinson's can tend to affect people's walking. But I wonder if you haven't seen one of us in a while, seeing a physical therapist, we may have a couple of cueing strategies or tips that could help you walk a bit faster. But in general, just getting started, every little bit counts. So I definitely want to give you encouragement to keep started, or keep going rather.
Great. That was great. Thank you for that question, Craig. That was an excellent one. Another question, we hear that like sitting is the new smoking, and so if you are in your one of your slides depicted that. So if you're finding that because of balance or freezing issues with Parkinson's or things like that, that you spend more time sitting just because it's difficult or unsafe for you to be up and around, can you suggest other ways to increase physical activity, outside of just walking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is hard because a lot of the general information you get is related to step counts and those sorts of things. But that's not the only way to stay active. So there's definitely chair programs that if you're really unsteady and it's just not safe for you to go out for a walk, you can look into chair yoga or seated exercise routines, such as using a recumbent bike or any kind of exercise equipment that would be safe for you. At your local gym should have a number of options. But that's another good reason to check in with a physical therapist and see if they could give you some recommendations that would help keep you safe, but kind of help you still to hit this mark as close as you can. I really like the way the World Health Organization, they have an entire section on their recommendations for physical activity designed for people with chronic health conditions. And they really encourage you within the limits of safety and your symptoms to try to find some way to get as close to those recommendations as you can.
Awesome. Okay, just looking down here. Another good question. Is it best to track steps or watch your heart rate? So there's so many different metrics to look at your movement. What do you suggest in terms of those two options?
Yep. So the steps per day is one thing that we can often get through a smartphone or even just a smart watch rather, or even just having your phone in your pocket. The advantage of watching your steps per day is it is a good look at your physical activity across the whole day, assuming you're wearing that device. Watching your heart rate while you exercise gives you a good idea of how vigorous your exercise was within that kind of 30-minute workout, just to give you an example. So there's sort of two separate things. Like we talked about, not all physical activity is exercise, but all exercise is physical activity. So I would look at the steps per day as a way for you to look at how sedentary or not sedentary you've been across the day. But if you are able to exercise in these sort of 30-minute workout chunks where you're getting cardiovascular exercise, under the direction of your doctor or physical therapist, you can set certain heart rate goals, which we've talked about in prior Let's Keep Moving installments, about kind of ways to try to optimize the aerobic exercise component of your routine.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. And another one is, after a workout, and I see all the great workouts people are doing. There was a tango class, a lot of boxing, some dance. Yeah. Susan does chair yoga. We have Joe, who also does strength balance and boxing, also some Pilates. So all these great exercise programs. But what should you do if you do? Because we say you can't. It's not great to do an hour of intense exercise and sit the rest of the day. But what if you do your exercise in the morning and you're just tired the rest of the day? You don't feel that great. You don't feel like getting up and moving. So do you have any suggestions for that, to try to increase physical activity when you're meeting the exercise requirements?
Yeah, this is tricky. And even in some research we've done, we find, we can increase the amount of time people spend doing like brisk walking, for example, but their steps per day might not always change. So this is something that we're often thinking about, because you do want to try to add something to your routine without taking something else away if you can. So it could be a matter of breaking up your exercise into shorter sessions if you need to, or maybe picking something that's a little bit less rigorous, or trying to get through that first kind of week or two as you're adjusting to a new routine. But it's important to try to maintain your regular level of activity and adding those kind of more moderate to vigorous exercise sessions on top of that.
Okay, awesome. So we had a comment from someone from the Training Wheels Off Parkinson support group, and just noting that there was a recent study from Yale University showing high intensity exercise may neurodegeneration in PD. So this is a little delving into more of the exercise domain, but we've gotten some really great questions about this. So what high intensity exercise would you recommend? And I ask you this knowing that you've done some research yourself on high intensity exercise in Parkinson's.
Yeah, so there's a number of different protocols that have been shown to be helpful in helping people. We're sort of at the point where the best way to say this is we see that people's symptoms develop more slowly. We're still trying to make that extra connection of exactly how that works. That's definitely the kind of emerging science right now. But in general, working at what we call a moderate to vigorous intensity is really important. And depending on the particular research protocol you're reading, there are a few different ways of defining that. One of the challenges to translating these research findings to the clinical world is a lot of times we can get very, very individualized recommendations for research participants. So for example, they might have a stress test where we know their exact max heart rate, and we can tell them to exercise, just for an example, at 80% of their individual max heart rate. But we're still trying to find the right way of translating those findings to the more like kind of clinical world where we don't always have that detailed information in front of us. So it can sound funny, but sometimes asking yourself on a scale of 0 to 10, how hard are you working? And then trying to keep that, towards like a 7 or 8 is a general way of trying to decide. That would be a very vigorous workout. So you would want to make sure you're cleared for that intensity of exercise by your doctor and your physical therapist. But that could be an eventual kind of goal to try to aim for if you want to try a higher intensity workout. Moderate intensity could be closer towards like a 5 or 6 out of 10.
Okay, great. We had another question from a YMCA exercise teacher. And I thought, again, it's sort of more in that realm of exercise, but I thought it was a good question. So Andy asked, is there an ideal ratio of how much cardio, resistance training, balance, movement should be covered in an hour? So if you have an hour class or you have an hour with your trainer or whatever, or just on your own at home or at the gym, what's a good ratio of those different components? Where would you spend your time?
Yeah, it's a great question, because in these group settings, you want to try to have something that will kind of fit these general guidelines that we had on the slides a couple of pages ago. So you want to try to help people get that 150 minutes of the cardiovascular exercise, 2 to 3 days a week of the balance and strengthening exercise. So I think depending on how many days a week the class is run and the individual participants, you would want to try to get a little, like half an hour of cardiovascular exercise in if you can, and then splitting the remaining time, I would wonder about across some of the other resistance training and balance. But it's a tall order to get to everything in 1 hour. So I definitely appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, I know. I try to pick exercises sometimes in classes where I'm getting balance and strength in the same thing. They get hit 2 birds with 1 stone there. So
yeah, and I think it's so important to try to think of those kind of opportunities for us, because there's just a long list of all these types of exercise and physical activity that you should be getting, and trying to find ways we can multitask is really important for all of us, right?
Yeah, and a bunch of people have shared in the comments some different opportunities for online exercise, some different classes. I think just scrolling through here, there's been a bunch of good suggestions. How do you, in terms of getting exercises more online, what are some things that you think are important in terms of safety, and if you're exercising at home and trying to get more movement at home? What do you recommend sort of in terms of checking into which classes are most appropriate for people?
Yeah, I would definitely start by making sure that it is tailored towards people with Parkinson's. So, for example, the APDA has listings of online exercise classes, or classes that are even hybrid, so they could be in person or online. So if you're logged into your state or local APDA chapter, you can find those online. As one example, you'll at least know that the people teaching the class are comfortable and familiar with Parkinson's. Also, what I like to really look for is that they're adapting it. So, for example, like a few dance classes for Parkinson's, they'll have 3 different levels to each exercise. So if someone has balance problems, there's a seated version of the activity, and then there's sort of like a medium activity next to a chair that you could grab onto for safety, and then a 3rd level, which is without the chair right there. And I think that's a really nice way, because you can follow along with that and see which version of that might be most appropriate for you. So that's another thing to look for.
Good. Okay, yeah, that was one of Mary Sue had recommended in the APDA Missouri, which I've also heard has really good classes. So, Yeah, awesome. And then we also had a comment, which I totally agree with, from Michael. That was one of my favorite exercises. So standing on one leg while lifting a small weight. No, don't try that at home unless you're it's safe. But that was right along the lines of what I was saying. You can do some strength training and some balance training, so you get more bang for your buck.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great way of trying to just get around to everything at the same time.
Yeah, awesome. All
So,
right.
Tammy, I think we have time for one more if there was any left.
I will search
Oh, yeah,
through.
sure.
This is the age-old question. I think, but it always bears repeating. This is again from the Training Wheels Off Parkinson support group. So I'm frequently asked, as am I, what is the best exercise for Parkinson? So, and he typically responds, he or she, I think, the one you actually do. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I think that's a great answer. And I know personally, everyone's always asked me, what's the best option? And I think we've heard so many wonderful suggestions in that. Like I said, there's dance, there's Pilates, there's Tai Chi, no one mentioned, but that's another one that's so good for people with Parkinson's and has research evidence. But would you agree with that statement that the best exercise is the one that you'll do?
Yes, I think we could not end on a better note than that. And I really hope you know how much I feel that, because I know we had worked that in earlier when we were talking about ways of incorporating physical activity into your routine. It is very important to consider what you enjoy and make sure that there's that motivation to go in, you know, even if you're not having a great day, but you can still get to it. You want to have something that you're going to want to get to that class for, or that gym for. So that is a very important consideration. Well, we're still waiting for that like kind of super definitive answer from the research, but the good news is that we know lots of things work. So when we know that lots of things work, it's important to think through like kind of what you actually do enjoy and what will keep you motivated over time.
Awesome. Great advice. Thanks, Tim.
Oh, thank you so much, Tammy, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for logging in and listening. And we really appreciate you and your comments. If we didn't get to anything that you had asked, please do consider calling or emailing. We have the rehab@bu.edu address and the phone number down at the bottom here. But can't wait to hear from you, and best of luck with your routine.
Yeah, keep up the good work, everyone. It sounds like a lot of good exercisers out there. Take care.
Hi, I'm Leslie Chambers, President and CEO of the American Parkinson Disease Association. Thank you so much for joining us today on our program. Every day, APDA is committed to providing helpful programs just like this one, as well as a wide variety of support groups, exercise classes, and educational programs to support the Parkinson's disease community. Whether online or in person, APDA is here for you every step of the way. You can find all of our upcoming virtual events on our website at apdaparkinson.org/events. We keep you posted on our social media channels as well, so make sure you follow us there. You can also connect to local resources and events through our nationwide network of chapters and information and referral centers. Remember, we're just a click or a phone call away. If you've enjoyed today's broadcast, I hope you will consider making a donation to help keep programs like this possible. Every gift, large or small, helps APDA support people living with PD through thoughtful programming, reliable resources, groundbreaking research, and more. Please visit apdaparkinson.org/donate today to support our critical work for those with Parkinson's. We are so grateful for your generosity. Thank you.